For most of my life, I had no idea how to ask for what I needed. I have ADHD, and I didn't get real language for that until I became a teacher myself. Even then, what changed things wasn't a diagnosis. It was watching my classroom. I started building in things like timers, visual reminders, nonverbal cues, and regular time outside. Accommodations I built specifically for a handful of students who had documented sensory processing needs. Here's what I didn't expect. Those same accommodations made every student in the room more successful. Not just the kids who were struggling, but everyone. I carried that with me. I trained interpreters at California State Parks on engaging neurodivergent youth and visitors. I carried it into my work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium with kids on and off the spectrum. The lesson kept repeating. Design for the kid who needs the most support, and you usually end up building something better for everyone. Today's guest has spent over a decade discovering the same thing from the other side of the desk. As an occupational therapist working in classrooms across Philadelphia, watching the same gaps repeat themselves over and over until she built a framework to fix it at the source instead of one child at a time. This is Emily Wishnick, occupational therapist and creator of the 100 Languages of Regulation. My name's Scott Shepard, I'm your host, and you're listening to Hopeful by Nature. Welcome, Emily. Thanks so much for coming here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I know you're an occupational therapist, but for a lot of our listeners at home, they might not really understand what that means. So can you help us understand what is occupational therapy?
Sure. I would say 95% of the population doesn't know what occupational therapy is, so it's a great place to start. So occupational therapists work with people across the lifespan in order to support them in participating in everything that happens throughout a day. When we think about what kids do, what kids need and want to do, their occupations, kids play, learn, develop, grow, socialize, and all of these things are considered the important aspects of childhood. And so when occupational therapists work with children, we look a lot at developmental milestones that impact so many things. So we look at gross motor skills, so the big muscle movements of the body. We look at fine motor skills, the small muscle movements of the hands, and we look at how those milestones will impact things like learning to get dressed by yourself, learning to eat, learning to use utensils, learning to use the bathroom, learning to button buttons, zip zippers, learning to hold a crayon, learning to write, learning to connect with people socially, so learning to regulate your emotions, which that's a big area that I am focused on. Learning, and also sensory processing, which is a term that most people aren't necessarily familiar with and is a big crux of my work as an OT, both as a direct therapist, but also in the larger work that I'm doing now with professional development. We also work on social emotional skills in general and access to learning environments. So all of those things will impact a child's ability to participate, function, grow, play, do all the things that they need and want to do in their lives. And so typically occupational therapists work in one-to-one kind of settings, and it's more of a reactive model where a child is identified for services based off of specific deficits that come through from observations from concerned teachers and parents, and then they get some testing done by an occupational therapist in order to support their need for one-to-one services. But from my lens, I have been seeing a consistent gap in how children are supported in general in classrooms. And so taking the frameworks of occupational therapy and applying them to systems is where my work is headed now. Because occupational therapy, when it's just working one-to-one, is not enough. And that's where my work sits.
That's really interesting. It sounds like what you're describing is almost like structures of support to help people be more human, to live in their bodies, to live in their minds, to engage in their life. Does that sound correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. And obviously, if we're dealing with structures of support, there are systems that are the foundation of those structures. In my own life as an educator, I've seen occupational therapists come into the classroom to support teachers and students with things like behavior management, but also things like fine motor skills like you were describing, reading, writing, and so on and so forth. I'm curious about the 100 Languages of Regulation. That sounds like a methodology that's yours, that you've created. Is that correct?
It is correct, yeah.
So how did you wind up designing a new methodology of occupational therapy? I guess, like, what led you to this profession in the first place, and what are the 100 languages of regulation?
So I don't know that I would call it a methodology. I would say it's a framework. So basically, from working as an occupational therapist for over a decade in classrooms, I was consistently seeing the same problems over and over again. And they became so persistent for me that I reached a level of burnout inside where it's just like, I felt like in the one-to-one setting of offering occupational therapy services that I could only move the needle so much because there's so many factors that are out of your hands when you work one-to-one with children. And the nature of my one-to-one work with children was in Pennsylvania, where I currently live. Our early intervention system is both birth to 3 and 3 to 5. Not every state in the United States operates their programs in the same way. But what my job looks like functionally is visiting lots of preschools and homes, seeing kids one-to-one. I could bounce around to 8 places a day. And over time, that gives you pattern recognition potentially, where what I would consistently see was a lot of schools doing things that were developmentally inappropriate. So a lot of things that were pushing down academics that were not appropriate for their age, for the child's age and developmental level. But it wasn't just for the child I was seeing, it was for the whole classroom. And the children that I had been seeing, that I was working with, all had identified special needs. And so in a classroom where the typical kids are already being given a task that's too hard for them, and then on top of it, you have the children with special needs being given those same tasks, and my reflections not always being welcome in that respect.
Sure.
That kind of, if you're somebody who cares, which I am, and you see this problem over and over again, and you can't do anything about it, it feels like you're working against gravity. It's like, I know developmental science, and unfortunately, the early childhood education landscape in this country is really fragmented for so many reasons, one of which being educators not being supported enough financially, so the pay being super low for early childhood educators, and not everybody having consistent access to education about what even is developmentally appropriate.
Sure.
Putting me in a scenario where my reflections aren't necessarily welcome for what they are doing in the classroom, and then I'm supposed to fix it somehow, like on a one-to-one lens. Like it created a very specific type of burnout where it's just like, so how many times can I say the same thing over and over again and the same scenario over and over again? I reached a point with myself where I was like, I can't do this anymore, honestly. And I did a lot of personal development work on myself and reached a certain point where I knew that I needed to take another direction. And I had been working with a coach for several years, and I have another line of work that I do in personal development, but within that own process in myself, I created enough distance from my day job while I was building the coaching business where I really needed to protect my own energy and feel really clear in what I was doing day to day. And the work in early intervention OT that I'm personally doing at this time is all like I completely curate my own caseload where I can give back cases for any reason. And I had to be very protective of my energy. And so all these patterns that I was seeing over time of certain kids in environments that were completely not developmentally appropriate, I wouldn't work with those kids anymore in those centers because I didn't feel impactful. But I still was seeing persistent gaps, and I felt a lot clearer in my day-to-day work because I didn't feel like as much I was working against gravity.
Sure.
And I just reached a certain point where a teacher had said to me, like I felt very clear and I felt resourced in myself where I didn't feel burnt out. A teacher had told me she attended a professional development workshop on autism. And she told me that it was not good, that it was bad. And I was like, I could do that in my sleep.
Yeah.
And I had a light bulb moment. Like that was the moment where I was just like, wait a minute, I could teach teachers and I have so much to offer teachers. And when I basically went down a rabbit hole and I completely, everything that had been burning me out about the field became a framework because I was like, wait a minute, if I could actually have a voice and teach teachers what I'm seeing and what the root causes are, all of these courses poured out of me in order to support teachers and actually change classrooms in a sustainable way. Because I believe that occupational therapists have access to knowledge that it makes no sense that teachers do not have. Occupational therapists have access to understanding the neuroscience of learning, of regulation, of all these incredible supports that even when we're in classrooms one-to-one, which not even every state has that for the 3 to 5 age group, sometimes we're not even in those classrooms. We have such incredible knowledge that we could be sharing with teachers, but it doesn't happen typically in a one-to-one setting because teachers are managing a classroom and we're there to support one kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how this was born.
That sounds like an incredible journey. I see so many similarities between what you're describing and what conservationists and environmental educators experience when engaging community as well. Like burnout and despondence is so real. Teachers are missing out on that. And as a result, students' experiences are suffering. Students aren't getting the type of experiences that they need to really engage developmentally in our collective work to care for and protect the places where we play. I also really appreciate the fact that you're talking about like how you can support educators to neurodivergent young people where, you know, our society is waking up to the fact that we are incredibly neurodiverse and we need educators to be equipped with the skills and knowledge to be able to better support those young people and meet them where they are. So like, what are the top 3 examples of how you might support a teacher to better engage a neurodivergent child?
I really feel like what my work does is offer a way of seeing that fundamentally changes classrooms. So the entry point for my work, which is it is my flagship course, is a course called Sensory Processing and its Impact on Learning and Development. Sensory processing is human. Sensory processing is how human beings take information in from their senses and interpret it, which, like, if you think about just like anything that you have to do, there's sensory components to it.
Absolutely.
Learning, like right now, I'm having this conversation with you, but in the background, I hear a car driving by. I feel the clothing on my skin. Hear my neighbor talking in the hallway, but my brain is able to filter out this conversation and focus on it and still connect with you, even though there's all of this other sensory processing information coming into my body at this time. And that isn't something that I take for granted.
Yeah.
Because I work with so many children and have worked with so many children that may have senses that feel more elevated or lower than others that will impact their ability to follow a direction, do anything that you ask them to. Everybody has sensory preferences. So, you know, like, for example, I prefer warm weather, not a big fan of the cold. But that doesn't mean that I can't function in the cold. It's just a preference, right? But for somebody with sensory processing differences, they may not be able to function in a certain kind of environment. And so sensory processing, I believe, is the foundation for understanding actually how to teach human beings. And that is training that teachers, if teachers have it, they're unicorns. I believe it should be a part of education programs.
Before I started this podcast, I spent years building outdoor and environmental education programs at California State Parks and the Monterey Bay Aquarium. One thing I learned, the same way Emily learned it in the field, the best program design isn't built around the average kid. It's built around the kid who needs the most support. And when you get that right, every kid benefits. Most outdoor and environmental education programs are run by people who are brilliant at their subject matter and were never trained in how kids actually develop, regulate, and learn. That gap costs programs real engagement, and it costs funders real trust. Through the field program audit, I work directly with organizations to look honestly at how their programs are built, what's working, what's not, and where the real opportunities are for every kid in the room, not just the ones already thriving. If that's a conversation worth having, I'd love to talk. Find the details at wildwordinstitute.net. That's WILDWARD institute.net. Now, back to Emily. It sounds like what you're saying is you have to understand the sensory processing capacity of each individual student. And what you're teaching teachers to do is to see differently. Scientific illustration is a really great example of a process that's being used now in outdoor and environmental education programs to help young people focus in on the sensory processing that they're engaging, because so often there's so many things happening in a novel outdoor environment that it's really difficult to focus on something small. And I'm sure that there are countless examples of strategies that you're engaging young people in to support them in their sensory processing and their regulation of that input. Does that really fit into kind of what you're describing as the 100 languages of regulation? Or is that, when you say regulation, are you focusing more on emotions?
Not only emotions, no. So regulation is in part, yeah, it's absolutely emotions, but regulation is sensory, environmental. It's like so many different factors that converge together to be one thing.
I am hearing that regulation comes in many forms. Where we often talk about regulation in the educational environment is talking about behavior regulation, or talking about impulse regulation, or talking about emotional regulation, right? Teaching yourself to be observant of those thoughts as they're moving through your mind, engaging in practices like mindfulness. That's one of the reasons that I really love engaging people in the outdoors, is that those things that make you able to engage with the outdoors are transferable skills that make you a better student. How do you think engagement with nature or engagement with the outdoors may support your work in teaching teachers or teaching students about the 100 languages of regulation?
I think that the outdoors naturally provides a lot of opportunities for working on so many different skills. Children, being outside is such a powerful sensory experience, and being able to climb and play and utilize materials that are just in nature naturally build a lot of the skills that teachers are trying to bring out of children inside classrooms, but in less codified ways. They will just be brought out naturally if they're in the right environment. So like, for example, when children are, engaging in climbing, you're activating what's called the proprioceptive sense, which is the sense that tells your body where it is in space. And you are supporting your physical development. And when you activate the proprioceptive sense, you are supporting your body and feeling more grounded and understanding that you're safe. And safety is number one in regulation. And if you're not regulated, you can't learn. Also, children, when they play in the sandbox, they're using both of their hands together. In OT lingo, we call that bilateral coordination. And you're supporting all these skills that use both sides of the body at the same time when you're playing in sand. You're feeling the sunshine, you're feeling your warmth, you're working with your interoception. Interoception is the sense that helps you understand your body's temperature and needs related to your body that are more subtle and internal. You're working on social skills potentially with all of your friends outside. There's so much that happens outside that we don't need to rely on so many lesson plans or all of these things, because these environments naturally allow for them, and it's healthy and human. Not every kid has access to that at this time.
That's a really good point. I grew up in Southern California, and I spent all of my time on and under the ocean. And in one of my first jobs working with young people in San Diego County, I met loads of students that were 19, 20 years old that had never been to the beach. They'd grown up in San Diego County, never been to the ocean. And there are so many structural and systemic issues that are creating barriers to accessing the outdoors. It seems like schools are really uniquely situated to help increase that access by providing young people the opportunity to engage in the outdoors. And to what you're describing, it sounds like spending time outside is an incredible opportunity to develop regulation skills. It sounds like what you're describing is spending time outside has the opportunity to support people in developing the skills that they really need to be able to regulate inputs in their lives and to be able to properly interpret their senses. How do you see schools engaging young people in the outdoors or not?
Philadelphia has a pretty large low-income population, and schools that are not resourced and schools that are resourced. There's both that exist. And I see a lot of schools that don't even have an outdoor space, period. They might have something, they might have what I refer to as a Philly yard, which is like a little slab of concrete, throw some bikes out there. That's where the kids play. There are a lot of neighborhood parks, but it depends on where you're located and if also some of the neighborhoods aren't safe. There's this one school I work with. They have the most epic playground of all time. It like has trees they can climb. It has full playground equipment. They have a huge sandbox. They also have like big tires, and the kids like roll them down the hill. Like they play hard there. Yeah. So I see a lot of different access to it, but there's absolutely schools that don't have access to it at all, and I do not think that's okay. I think that on a policy level, every single school should have playground equipment for children to climb on and play on because developmentally they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have access to it, it actually can create delays and exacerbate existing ones.
Absolutely. Fred
Yeah.
Rogers was quoted saying, play is the work of childhood. Like we need to be able to play. And he was such an incredible advocate for play and for regulation in particular. For me personally, I mean, he inspired, so many of the ways that I engage and I communicate with children, and particularly like the way that you can use silence as a mechanism to support young people to think critically about the sensory input that they're taking in around them. Like you can silently move through space as a teacher, and students will watch you and they're going to pick up on what it is that you're doing through nonverbal communication.
Mm.
I also hear what you're saying about the Philly yard. Like that's not a phenomenon that's unique to your geographic location. Unfortunately, there are park poor communities all across the United States. There are schools that lack access to green space all across America. Seeing schools like parks and parks like schools is an opportunity for us to bridge the gap between learning indoors and outdoors and really support the humanity of our communities all across the country. So, like, you've sparked a lot of curiosity in me around how schools might be able to support young people in developing their sensory processing skills, developing their ability to regulate. Can you tell us a story of a time when you provided an intervention through occupational therapy that resulted in a significant change in a young person's ability to regulate?
Some of my most favorite children that I've worked with have been kids who refuse every activity that I give to them. And I'll tell you why. Because I see myself in them, first of all.
Yeah.
Although I was a well-behaved kid. I wouldn't have behaved like that with a teacher. I've worked with some kids who, again, refused everything and still met all their goals. Those are my favorite kids. And the reason why they're my favorite kids is because they did it their way.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it their way in a school environment that supported them. And that actually speaks to what my work is about. If we actually set up environments well, less direct teaching even needs to really happen because so much of what will happen in a classroom naturally is provoked by the environment itself, where there's access to materials and activities that are more open-ended for children to engage in, but they do it when they want to versus, okay, let's sit down and do this activity right now, where there's less pressure to perform and the skills emerge naturally.
I love what you're saying about the environment naturally provoking the skills that young people need to develop in order to be successful in their learning environment or successful in developing a specific target skill. I've seen that so many times in taking young people into the outdoors, where the environment naturally provokes the curiosity that we're trying to inspire in young people to then feel connect to nature and to feel connected to their communities. I also have had several times where I've taken young people out to go and do a specific activity and they've refused everything. I remember I remember this one time in particular where I had started an outdoor education class at an elementary school, and we had a park across the street, and I was desperate to get kids to the park to be able to facilitate activities in what I considered to be quote unquote nature. And as we were getting ready to cross the street, you're talking about students having a hard time holding onto that loop. We had a four-way stop that we needed to cross with like 26 first graders,
Oh my
and they
God.
were all, yeah, absolutely, super overwhelming. They were all absorbed by this trail of ants that was going across the sidewalk, and I was furious. You guys, we have the park across the street. We need to get to the park. We got to go engage with nature. And what I realized in that moment was, no, we don't need to get to the park, Mr. Scott. We need to look at these ants. These kids are engaged, and this environment that we're in is naturally provoking the curiosity that I was intending to inspire through activities. So often teachers just need to step back and let the mountains speak for themselves, you know? What kind of structures or environmental supports might you recommend to a new teacher in putting together their classroom so that they can provoke that type of natural curiosity or that type of natural learning and engagement?
I think that it's important to consider what is developmentally appropriate for the age group, and I think that it's just a huge knowledge gap that a lot of teachers don't necessarily have, unfortunately. In a great early childhood classroom, and there's lots of ways to do it. Like I don't consider that there's one right way to do it, but I do think that children absolutely need opportunities for open-ended play. There's so many like classic centers that I see in most early childhood environments that I think are wonderful, and they're classics for a reason because they work. Like things like, having dramatic play area where you have dress up, where you have, like a play kitchen with toy food, like things to build, things to like a building center with blocks. I think that open-ended play is really, really important, but like the classroom offers opportunities for that, and that is built in to the day and is protected time.
I've noticed with my own kids, sometimes when we're trying to engage in open-ended play, I find myself stepping in to try and direct them towards a certain kind of engagement. You know, boredom can be kind of scary for a lot of parents and for a lot of teachers because you don't know what's going to come out of that. But in reality, boredom is what breeds creativity.
Mhm.
And I love the idea of what you're describing as open-ended play. In my opinion, the best place to engage in open-ended play is when you're outside, getting connections, building collections, building structures. You talked about like picking up pieces of grass and throwing them at a friend. Like there's nothing like throwing a rock into a body of water and hearing that splash, you know. What might be some activities that you would structure or you would build into an outdoor environment that would support young people to engage in that type of self-directed, open-ended play?
I'm on a playground. Just encouraging them to climb. Climbing is a heavy hitter. Like climbing is so powerful because it activates the core and the upper body. And if you think about your body like it's a house, I would say your core is the foundation. So when it's one of the most frequent recommendations that I will give to teachers and families to work on so many things, but like it hits so many boxes because it really you're activating the proprioceptive sense, which is the sense that tells your body where it is in space, and your core is your center. So if everything is extending from your core, if you're feeling activated in your core, and some kids are weak in their cores, some aren't, but even if they aren't, they still benefit from it. Everybody benefits from it because you do everything better when your core is activated because you know where your body is in space, but it's also regulating too. Because if you're feeling a little all over the place, it can be the sense that really brings you down. So, like climbing is amazing for that. Monkey bars are amazing for that if they could do that. Not every kid can do that. I do a lot of animal walks with kids. That's a frequent strategy I use too because of the same reasons. And you don't even need equipment for that. And that doesn't have to be outside. That could be inside, could be anywhere. You just need a little bit of space. But yeah, bear walks, crab walks, wheelbarrow walks, like all those are like they're so powerful for regulation, but also they support fine motor development too, because if everything is extending from your core, your hands are extending from there too. And so you learn like, oh, wait, this is how I actually use my hands because I feel more grounded. If you're floppy in here, then everything is kind of a mess. You're just a mess when you try to do anything. So yeah, I would say those are the heavy hitters for outside. But of course, I'm an advocate for just playing and exploring and using your body in all the weird ways and fun ways that you can because this age group is in the sensory motor developmental period of life and they need to use their bodies. If they don't use their bodies, it creates delays.
And we're seeing young people spending more and more time on screens, not using their bodies. What kinds of impact do you think screens may be having, or just sedentary activities may be having on students' development?
I think it's creating delays. It's also creating addiction for sure. It makes it really hard to pay attention to anything else when you're on this highly addictive device. So it affects attention, of course, learning, and it's also over reliance on it. I'm seeing in a lot of classrooms, like there's some centers that I visit that really don't have much resources or space. And a common issue I will run into in schools is that the kid that I'm there to see doesn't sleep during nap time. And they need to give that kid something to do because otherwise they're going to disrupt the group. And they don't have staff or another space to like bring the child somewhere else, to let them play, do anything else. And so they have to sit on a nap mat for like over an hour being quiet. Like, are you kidding me? They're like 3, 4 years. Like,
Yeah.
these kids are way too little to
hmm
ask them to stay still and be quiet for that long if they're not sleeping. And then they give them a screen. And like, that's not what every school does, but I have run into it enough that it's concerning. And I understand that it's a convenient option and everybody's doing the best they can, but developmentally it's really detrimental.
What kinds of systems and structures do you think need to change to be able to support teachers with the resources that they need to be able to better engage young people in this like core developmental period of life?
I think that on a policy level, every center should have specific things in place. Every center would have to have a space for children that aren't napping and they would have to have staffing for it. And there would have to be structural funding for this because this is a pattern, this happens, this isn't avoidable. Like there are going to be some children who nap and some children who don't. And relying on screens for that isn't appropriate and isn't supportive and it's a pattern. So Structures should be created to support those children who aren't napping, that aren't just looking at a screen. I think that every program should have a playground or playground equipment access, as well as an indoor gross motor space for those days when you can't go outside. And also, of course, early childhood educators need to be paid what they're worth. 85% of brain development is happening before age, like by age 3, 95% by age 5. This is really important work. This cannot be minimized, and teachers need to be compensated appropriately. If we want to change the foundation of society, we need to support our educators. Period. End of story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that last statement. There are so many informal educators as well that are working in outdoor spaces that are not being paid, a living wage because they're being asked to engage in something that they're passionate about. We need to be adequately paying our educators in relation to the impact that they're having on the young people that they serve, particularly this early childhood age. I mean, like you said, it's so incredibly pivotal. There's so much research around, young people that don't have access to the outdoors in early childhood are significantly more likely to develop irrational fears of nature, more likely to develop a sense of disgust, and they're significantly less likely to care for and protect the environment as they move into adulthood. I would argue that, there's no such thing as bad weather necessarily. There certainly is improper clothing. So maybe there should be funding for better clothing for kids to be able to spend time outside in the elements, and then we also need to be educating our staff members on child development. We need people to understand that the environments around us are places where they belong, and places that are safe, and places that they can play in and that they can care for and protect as well. I really like this idea of conservation and occupational therapy working together to support humanity and the environment in a significant way. I'm curious, how can people learn more about the work that you're doing? Where should people go to get involved?
So I'm really just getting started. And at this time, I just am active on LinkedIn. I haven't even created a website yet.
So people should go to your LinkedIn. That's Emily Wishnick.
For right now.
Yeah. Wishnick, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So Emily Wishnick on LinkedIn. Can they search online anywhere for the 100 Languages of Regulation?
The website will come soon.
Awesome.
Well, we're not there yet, but it will be there. Will be coming.
Awesome. Well, when it comes, be sure to let us know, because we want to get it out to our listeners. We want to get it out to the airwaves, to folks that are engaging in this podcast. Emily, I really appreciate all of the insight that you've brought to the table today. It's clear that you're incredibly passionate about engaging young people in the activities that they need to be able to develop into the healthy and successful and productive adults that we really want to see them become. Regardless of where they may be starting, regardless of what kind of challenges, physical, mental, or emotional, might be standing in their way, it's just so cool that you're providing those kinds of supports to young people. You're providing those kinds of supports to the educators that care for them and are molding them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I always ask my guests if you could make one recommendation to our listeners as soon as they get off of this podcast to, get outside, to care for and protect the places where we play. What would that one recommendation be from your occupational therapy lens?
Understanding that your own emotional regulation impacts every single person that you meet. That we don't regulate our emotions or our feelings in a vacuum. That our brains are communicating with each other at all times. And if you want to see more peace in this world, begin with yourself.
That connects directly to what I learned in my own classroom, years before I ever heard the term sensory processing. She said the accommodations she builds for kids with specific needs, climbing, open-ended play, space to move, a quiet corner instead of a screen, aren't really accommodations. They're just good design. Every kid benefits. The ones with diagnosed needs just need it more urgently. I learned that exact lesson teaching a classroom of my own, timers, visual reminders, time outside built into the day rather than treated as reward. I built those for a specific student. They changed the whole room. There's research that backs up what both of us learned the hard way. A 1994 study published in the Journal of Environmental Education found that students without regular access to natural wild spaces showed measurably more fear and discomfort when they finally encountered them. Not because nature's frightening, but because unfamiliarity itself creates that response. Access, repeated over time, is what builds comfort. The same logic Emily applies to a classroom applies to an entire relationship with the outdoors. Emily's advice for what to do as soon as you finish learning: start with your own regulation. Your nervous system is in conversation with every person you meet, whether you're aware of it or not. If you want a more regulated classroom, a more regulated household, a more regulated world, it starts with you. You've been listening to Hopeful by Nature. Emily's still building her website, but you can find her and her work, The 100 Languages of Regulation, on LinkedIn. Search Emily Wishnick. We'll link in the show notes. If you like what you heard today, subscribe, leave a review, and share this with an educator who needs it. You've been listening to Hopeful by Nature, and we look forward to seeing you on future episodes.